afternoon. I'm Paul Fletcher. I direct the American Heritage Center here, and I have the privilege of welcoming today's speaker. Before I do so, let me ask you to turn your phones to silent or turn them off, whatever works best for you. Now, our speaker today, Kim Luperi, is that rare individual in the LA entertainment industry, a soft-spoken person. Luperi attended Allegheny College in Pennsylvania in 2008, showing all the traits of a writer. She majored in English and history, both degrees that emphasized papers over exams, and wrote a 130-page senior thesis that won prizes in both disciplines. Her thesis topic reflected her passionate interest in early Hollywood films, for she wrote on pre-code films that were shot before the imposition of the Production Code Administration in 1934. In 2014, Kim started writing the blog I See a Dark Theater about classic Hollywood. She often writes for Turner Classic Movies and has provided press coverage at the annual TCM Classic Film Festival. I also understand there's a book manuscript underway in that area. There's another side to Kim. Shortly after graduation, she went out to LA, where she has remained ever since. In 2010, she went to work for Stan Lee's POW Entertainment as an editorial manager. She ultimately took over social media work for the company, and for 5 years oversaw operations for therealstanley.com. In 2023, Kim went to work for Cartoon Studios, managing their Stan Lee branded social media, working with platforms with a followership totaling more than 27 million. I must say that Kim has almost become a regular here at the AHC, where this is her third trip to work in our entertainment collections. I was chatting with her earlier this afternoon, and she showed me one of Barbara Stanwyck's 2 Golden Globe statues, which I had not seen before. This afternoon's talk, however, will stay firmly in the modern realm as she talks about preserving Stan Lee's pop culture legacy. Kim.
Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Thank you, Paul, for that lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting me here, and thank you everybody for coming. As Paul mentioned, I have been here. This is my 3rd visit to the AHC, and I kind of feel like I'm an archivist at heart, so I feel at home here, and it really is an honor to be speaking here as well. One thing I just wanted to mention is I actually left the Stan Lee world professionally last month. I had been working with Stan and in that world for 15 years, just about. And so it was really interesting to kind of jump back into that world for this talk because it felt like I never left. So even though I'm no longer running the social media, I'm no longer working for Stan's companies, it's always going to be a part of me. So it's always really special for me to come back here, to see the papers, and then to speak to you all today. So one quick thing, I would never call myself knowledgeable on purpose, and I did that here because Stan always gave people nicknames, and they were usually alliterative. This is not really alliterative, but it starts with a K, so I figure it works. So I just wanted to add that little touch there. So I'm going to bring you back to the year 2008, and a little movie came out called Iron Man that you might have heard of. I did not see it back then, but superhero movies at the time were nothing new. Captain America made his first screen appearance in 1944, actually, so 80 years ago from today. But this film was different. It was produced by Marvel Studios. It was their first movie. So all the Marvel movies before this, Spider-Man, X-Men, there's a Hulk movie, those were all licensed to other studios. So this was the first in-house movie they did. and it was a huge success, and it was the start of something very, very big. And it was also something really big for his co-creator, Stan Lee. And Stan was certainly no stranger to comic book fans, people that had read the comics for decades, people that had watched the TV shows from the 60s to the 90s, or some of the early movies. They got fleeting peeks of Stan and his cameos, they knew his voice, they were familiar with him. But with the MCU, this was about to change because Stan, his celebrity became supercharged, basically. These movies became worldwide events, and so his fame skyrocketed. It was already pretty high, he was famous, but it went pretty big. So for the broader public, the people who weren't necessarily comic book fans, they really got to know Stan through his cameos in the movies, through his appearances on TV shows, through things like that. So it really cemented his place as a global pop culture icon. And I like movies, but for perspective, when I was looking for a job 2 years later, when Iron Man 2 came out, this wasn't really on my radar. Superhero movies weren't on my radar. I had never seen a Marvel movie. As Paul mentioned, I'm a classic film fan, and I wrote my thesis on the film on the lower left, which is a 1933 movie called Babyface. And what's really cool is that they have the script for Babyface here at the AHC, and I got to see it. So, but that was my world. Superhero movies were not on my radar at all. And I got the job actually through a temp agency. And they called me up, didn't tell me who it was for until they wanted to see me. And when they did want to interview me, they said it was for Stan Lee, and they paused for my reaction. And I paused as well because I did not know who Stan Lee was. So I said, great, and then I had to start Googling. I figured it out eventually. So I was originally hired as an assistant to Stan's business partner, Gil, at PAL Entertainment. This is a crazy collage of pictures that I either took of Stan or that have me and Stan in them. And I did some scheduling for Stan for his business meetings. I did scheduling for his San Diego Comic-Con schedule, which was just 4 insane days of panels and signings and parties. And PAL is a small company, so I got my hands in a lot of things. I got to give feedback on scripts and stories, and I went to premieres and some events and some of his filmings from his TV cameos. And eventually I transitioned into running his social media and his blog in early 2018. And at that point, I got the chance to share more about him online with people. And one thing I just want to point out about this slide is the upper right, near the upper right, there's Stan in Robin Hood costume. Kind of hard to see. And it's kind of weird to see the early 90s man in a Robin Hood costume, tights and everything. But that was part of a campaign that he did where celebrities were asked to dress as their favorite characters. And one of Stan's favorite characters in one of his favorite movies was the 1938 Adventures of Robin Hood. And as a classic film fan, it was really cool for me to be at that shoot. And it was something I got to connect with Stan about. You know, most people that talk to Stan, they just want to talk Spider-Man and comic books. And I was like, I want to talk about the movies you saw as a child. You know, all the old stuff. And nobody talked to him about that. So that was really special for me. But another connection to this image is that Stan, in 2008, got the National Medal of Arts, and he got it with the co-star in that movie, in Robin Hood, Olivia de Havilland, who was in Gone with the Wind, probably her best known credit. And yeah, so it's like worlds colliding, and for me, I was blown away. I loved it. And around 2018, this is also where my story with the AHC and the Stanley Papers started. As Paul mentioned, I was a history major. I'm a film historian. I love archives. I could live in archives. So when I heard about the papers, I was like, I need to come here. There's almost 200 boxes of Stan treasures, and I hadn't seen what that stuff was. And since I was now running the social media and his website, I was like, this needs to be out there, so I need to go and see it. So my first visit was 2018, and I think I came for 3 or 4 days, and everybody at work was like, why are you going for so long? Why are you going to Wyoming for that long? And I was like, no, don't. I'm not going to get through half the boxes. There's so much there, and I didn't. I think I got through less than 50% because there's just so much there. And when I got here, I was floored. There were things that I had heard about existing that I had never seen. There were so many things that I didn't know existed that I got to see, and I was just furiously scanning and taking pictures and stuff. And I got to share a lot of that online with people, which was really a treat because so many people, first of all, don't know that the papers are here. And not a lot of people, live near here, so getting the chance to share with them online, and then also getting the chance to tell people, if they're ever in the area, this is how you can come, and it's open to the public. You can see all these treasures, so that really hadn't been done before with his social media or his website, so I was really excited to help start that. But basically, here I was a classic film fan. I was kind of thrust into the Stanley world at a time when he was on the precipice of becoming even more of a global icon. So it was really a wild time for me to be a spider on the wall, if you will, and watch this man who was already legendary, but watch him really grow into a worldwide phenomenon. And in the process, I got to help preserve his legacy in my own way and share that with the world. So that was really something that was special to me. And I'm going to take you through a quick history of Stan and kind of illustrate it through items from his papers here. So let's go. So Stan was born in 1922 in New York City. His beginnings were very humble. His family did not have a lot of money, like a lot of families. They struggled from the Great Depression. But one example of his icon status is actually this Stanley Way on one of the streets that he grew up in the Bronx. And this only was installed, I think, a few years ago. And the image on the right, Madame Tussauds Wax Museum made a statue of Stan also a few years ago and took it out. They toured it around New York City. I don't know how they did that. But it made stops around New York City, and it made a stop at Stanley Way in the Bronx. So it was really cool to see students who went to the high school that Stan went to in the Bronx interact with it and take pictures. And that was really cool. But Stan loved reading. He loved movies. He was really inspired by books and films, and that definitely played a part in a lot of his later work. He had an active imagination, but as a kid, he was not famous yet. And so when I first saw the finding aid for the Stanley Papers, I noticed it started in 1926, when he was 4. And I was like, what? What could be there from 1926? And so it's this New Yorker is from 1926, and the Ballyhoo, I have no idea what magazine that is from 1931. And I was like, I have to see. There must be a significance to this. I have to see. And that's one of the really interesting questions that comes up with preserving a legacy of this magnitude, is that what's some of the significance of these items? And you don't know because Stan's not here anymore. So something was important enough to him to keep these, not only keep them, but send them to the archives. So honestly, if anybody knows why these are here, I would love to know, because I'm still trying to figure it out. And I first saw them 6 years ago. But I just wanted to point that out because I thought it was funny. But back to Stan's history, he ended up working in the comic book industry for almost 80 years, which is insane. And he obviously had a very strong work ethic, and he grew up during the Depression, and he started working very young to help his family out. And so, since we're at a university, I have to do a quiz. And it's a pretty easy quiz, but which of these jobs do you think that Stan had as a teenager? Actor, movie theater usher, obituary writer, office boy at a trouser company, or all of the above? Alright, it's E. He worked all these jobs because he was crazy. And I don't know the order. The order is kind of fuzzy, but he did all of these things. And there's a lot of funny stories from this time, but one of the stories when he was a movie theater usher that he told, and I have no idea if this is true or not, but it sounds like it could be because it's Stan, is he was working at a theater in New York City as an usher, and he said First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt came in one day to see a movie, as she does, and he was taking her to her seat, walking backwards, fell, and gets helped up, and it's Eleanor Roosevelt who helps stand up. And I'm like, I don't know if that's true, but it's a great story. So I'll keep repeating it. So when he eventually got a job at Timely Comics, he was still a teenager. And Timely Comics would later be known as Atlas, now known as Marvel, so it was the same company, just different names. And to him at first, it was just a regular job. It was a job. And accounts vary how he got the job. And there's two main stories. One story is that he answered an ad for a job at a publishing company. And he had been a writer, not professionally, but he had written things, so it's like, why not? And then another version is that his uncle, Robbie, was married to the publisher's wife, and so that was just kind of family in. Either way, he got to work, and basically at the beginning, he was filling inkwells, he was getting sandwiches for the co-creators of Captain America. Joe Simon and Jack Kirby were basically the only people working there at the time. He erased their pencil marks on art, did a lot of little things, and eventually he got the chance to write. And his first story was Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge. And it was a text story, so it wasn't the normal comic book panel that you see. It was a 2-page text story. And it was the first time he used the pseudonym Stan Lee. His birth name is Stanley Martin Lieber. He actually did legally change his name to Stan Lee, and that's one of the great mysteries to me, because I'm not sure when he changed his name, but a few decades later he did. And in standard Stan fashion, he made history in more than one ways with this. So not only was it his debut, but it was also the first time that Captain America threw his shield in the text. So a few issues later, Captain America would throw his shield in the art, in the panels, but this is the first time he threw it in the text. So yeah, leave it to Stan to come in and just make history day one. And from there he moved really fast. His first co-created character was Jerry Headline Hunter, and then his first superhero co-creation was the Destroyer, and this is all in 1941. And Stan was born in 1922, so he was not even 19, because he was born in December. So he was off rolling. And that same year, Simon and Kirby left. So basically, Stan was the only person left standing at Timely. And he became the interim editor-in-chief, which is not bad for a kid who is not even 20 years old. And this was another funny story that Stan would tell. He would say that he was informed that he was just holding the position until they found somebody with more experience, and he just figured they never found anybody because he had that job for 30 years. So, but I guess I never found anybody who could do it. So in the early 1940s, he joined the war effort. He was in the Army, and Stan's writing came in handy there. He wrote training manuals, but he did it in Stan style, which meant he did it in comic book format. And that actually, he found, was really effective in teaching what needed to be taught. And so it was really one of the first times that he found how comics could be used in an educational sense. And I had to throw these holiday cards in on the right because they are amazing, and I wish you could see the one on the top better, but these are from the late 40s, early 50s, I believe, and the one on the top is, I think, it's Christmas and Happy New Year, and so this is late 40s, and there are a ton of little Easter eggs in here. There's a severed arm at the bottom right, there's a whip, there's Stan's initials over everything, and so it really shows his humor and his style that early in the late 40s, and it's one of my favorite things. I could just look at it forever because there's so many things to see in this. So This is in the collection if you ever want to take a look at it. And Stan even wrote song lyrics. So while he was creating a training manual for the Army Finance Department during the war, he saw the accountants marching and they didn't have a song to march to. So he was like, I have to fix this. And he wrote this song, so let me play it for you.
To the tune of the Air Force song. Off we go into our office yonder, at our desks morning till night, far away from any battle's thunder, we pay off the fellows who fight. Clerks alert, guarding our books from blunder, mimeographs clutter the floor. We write, compute, sit tight to boot. Nothing'll stop the fiscal director. They loved it and they used to sing it all over the place.
That was filmed by a coworker of mine, and I don't remember if I was in the room for that, but when I saw this again, it reminded me of how he would break into song randomly. So in that clip, he was signing something, and so we would do a lot of signings with Stan in the office. He would have to sign comics or other things, and we would make it into an assembly line to make it easier for us to just go through as quick as possible. And it was kind of a boring task to sign a bunch of things, and he always made it fun. He would just like break into song. He would tell funny stories. He also sang us his high school fight song, I think, which again, he graduated in 1939, and he could sing that like it was yesterday. It was unreal. But Stan, when he was discharged from the Army, he used to say that he did not know his official title in the Army until he was discharged. And his title was playwright. And it's not a normal title for people to have. And actually, I think he was one of fewer than 10 people who had that title. But there are a lot of famous names. One of them was film director Frank Capra, who directed It's a Wonderful Life, the future Dr. Seuss. So he was in good company, but playwright, you would never really think that that was a title in the Army. And one of my favorite stories from Stan also comes from this era. He did not tell this story often, and I tried to capture it on film, but I never did. And basically during the war, he was still working for Timely Comics. He was not editor-in-chief, but he was still writing, and he would get his assignments through the mail. So he knew when his assignments were coming, and then he would write and then send it back. So one day he was waiting for an assignment. He didn't get it. They said, you don't have your mail today. And he was like, that's not true. And so once the mailroom closed, he went back, he peeked through the window, and he said he saw a letter in his little slot. And so he broke into the mailroom to get his letter and to get his assignment and to finish his work on time. And to me, that's such a quintessential Stan story because he got in trouble for that. He almost got, I think, kicked out of the Army for that. I'm like, who else would almost get kicked out of the Army and break into a mailroom to try to do their job? Just Stan. So, I love that story. So Stan went back to his job after the war. He eventually got married to his wife Joan in the late 40s, and they were together for almost 70 years. It was a beautiful love story. And they started a family in the early 50s. These are some of Stan's home movies. This is literally like 10 seconds of Stan's home movies. There's over 3 hours of his home movies in the collection, and it's just Stan goofing around for 3 hours. And Joan a little bit. And there's dogs and bathing suits, and there's everything. And they're really fun to see. So superheroes were the vogue in the 40s, but their popularity plummeted in the 50s. But Stan didn't just write heroes. So we got another quiz. Which of these genres did Stan write other than heroes? Romance, mystery, horror, humor, war, or all of the above? You guys freaked me out. Yeah, it's all of the above. In the 50s, he was just doing a little bit of everything. And he did romance titles, mystery, I love his humor titles, and there's a little bit in the exhibit about that. He did a lot of humor, especially in the 50s and 60s. He did a lot of political humor with photographs, and he would just do like the speech bubbles. And there's some really great stuff in the exhibit. And there's things that, when I came here, they're called You Don't Say. They're little magazines, but there's also newspaper strips that I had no idea existed. And so they're in the archive as well, and they're fantastic. But Stan was writing all this stuff in the 50s. It was a really rough time. The Comics Code came in 1954, very similar to the production code in movies, where they were limited with what they could do and what they could show. And then Atlas, which timely became Atlas, was forced to lay off a lot of its staff in the 50s. Stan stayed on, but he had to lay everybody off, and he hated doing that. So it was a really tough time, and Stan was getting frustrated professionally as well. And there was a story that he told that he was, for a long time, embarrassed to be a comic book writer. And so he would be at parties, and people would ask him, what do you do? And he would say, oh, I'm a writer. And he would try to get away from them because he did not want to elaborate. But they would always say, well, what do you write? And he would say, oh, I write for kids. And they'd be like, no, but what do you write? And he would finally say, I write comic books. And then they would run away. And because for a really long time, it was something that was seen for kids. And there was, Stan really, a lot of people just didn't feel really good about that. But that was all about to change. And you might know the story of the Fantastic Four. They were created in 1961, and basically Stan was asked to do something like DC's The Justice League, which had just come out. It was very popular, but he was tired of copying the same old formula, and he was also thinking of quitting at that time. So his wife was like, just do something that you want to do, like write something that you want to write. If you want to quit anyway, the worst that could happen is they'll fire you. It's the same outcome. So Stan and Jack Kirby co-created the Fantastic Four, and this is just like a silent thing, but there's a folder in the archive from 1961, which is when the Fantastic Four came out. But there's not too much in the Stan Lee papers from the 1960s compared to other time periods, and I've always wondered why. And I've been told some different theories, and somebody told me that there was a fire at one point, not here, but Stan's items, there was a fire, and then other people said, they were just at the start of creating all these really famous characters, and they didn't know what they were doing yet. Obviously Spider-Man was not as big as it was, they had no idea what they were doing, so you might not save things if you didn't know that they were going to be huge. But that really made me wonder, because they knew the success of these characters pretty quickly. Fantastic Four was successful. Spider-Man came in 1962. X-Men, Avengers came in 1963. And the reaction was pretty quick. With Spider-Man, for instance, he was put in the last issue of Amazing Fantasy. They were going to cancel that series. And then Spider-Man blew up. I think they did cancel the series, but they gave Spider-Man his own book. And so they knew pretty quickly when things were popular. And not only did sales reflect the popularity of Marvel, but also the amount of fan mail. Because they did not get a lot of fan mail before, and now they were just inundated with fan mail. From kids, adults, college students. The letter on the upper right is from, you can't read it, but it's from a university in Thailand. I think it's 1968. And so only a few years later, the popularity had just gone all around the world. And so it's pretty amazing to see. And one of the things I love about Stan's papers is how much fan mail he kept. And you can see some, if you haven't seen the exhibit yet, there is a really cool wall of a map of the world, and it shows where some of the fan mail came from. It came from all over the world. And Stan, I remember him saying he was always so thankful for the fans, whether the stories they told him, because whenever he was at a signing, people would just say, like, you changed my life, like, all these amazing things. They would come up and tell him, they would write it to him, and so they were really of these letters come from kids, and kids do not have a filter at all. And so they would yell at him in letters and just say, like, why did you kill this character? The letter on the right, which was actually a fan letter, it's one of my favorites. It's beautifully illustrated and written. And yeah, he's yelling at Stan for getting something wrong. That's the content of that letter. But Stan's assistant would tell me that Stan didn't really mind when he got stuff like this, when he got corrections, because it meant that people were paying attention to his work. So I was like, okay. There's a lot of fan stuff from celebrities. I know the Paul McCartney letter on the right is in the exhibit. It's actually not a fan letter. I think he and Stan were working together at one point. And on the left, there's one of Stan's replies. So there were a lot of replies in the papers, and Stan would reply in the early days. And if people were kind of witty and funny in their letters, he would be witty and funny right back to him. So this one is addressed to Dear Overqualified. Somebody said they sent him their resume for a job, which also happened a lot. But Stan did reply to fan letters. Later years, because we kept getting fan letters to the office, hundreds sometimes, and so later years his assistants would usually reply. And speaking of the fan, Stan's soapbox started in 1967. It was Stan's editorial column on the letters page, the Marvel's letters page, and he wrote about current events in the world. He wrote about what was happening in the world of Marvel, and there was another way that he connected with readers. This is just so fun. I went through so many things. There's stuff typewritten, there's stuff on computers, there's stuff handwritten. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And not only does it show how he interacted with fans, but also it gives a window into his creative process, which is really fun to see. And Stan's collection has a lot of paper artifacts. It's mostly paper. Well, there's a lot of media too, but there's a lot of paper. And there's typed treatments that he wrote, which are basically outlines to stories. There's his handwritten notes on comic book art. They're mostly photocopied, but they're really fun to see. There's business research. And again, the fact that Stan kept all this and sent it to the archive shows that he was really thinking about preserving his work for generations to be able to see. And what's really cool is that, you can see a comic book, you can see a movie like superheroes, but you don't really think everything that goes into it. So in the papers, there's the business part and the research and the marketing, just all the stuff is in there, and that all went into it. So Stan definitely recognized what was happening with the 60s when everything kind of started to get really popular. And he formed the Merry Marvel Marching Society in 1964, and that was the first official Marvel fan club. And he also started speaking at schools. On the left is a typewritten, I guess, just colleges that he spoke at. And what was really cool for me is that my school, which is a tiny, tiny school in Pennsylvania, was on here. So, yeah, he spoke everywhere. And he even spoke at Carnegie Hall in 1972. So within a decade, just like you see how it grows. I mean, yeah, who else would be speaking at Carnegie Hall unless you're super popular? So it shows how far everything is coming. And one thing I really, really love is these event posters in the archive. And there's just so many. Some are professionally done, some are hand-drawn. And it's just funny, and again, it shows like all the places he went and all the things that he did. And while Stan he co-created all of these characters, and he shares the credit for creating them, rightly so. He was really the person who put a face to Marvel, and he was the one who helped spread the word all over the world. So seeing example after example of this just really hits home how hard he worked to make Marvel a household name. And as I mentioned, his fame, his personal fame, skyrocketed at that time. And you see that through the letters and the articles and the appearances that he was doing in the 60s and 70s. And it really reminded me of observing his celebrity in the 2010s when I was with him. And I wrote an article after Stan passed away that he was just a regular guy to me, because even though he was a celebrity, I saw him every day for 8 years. And some people would ask, they're like, have you met him? And I was like, yes, I see him every day in the office. He comes in every day, except when he's traveling. And when you see somebody every day, they could be the president, like they become a regular person to you. So he was a regular person to me at work. But then when I would go somewhere with him, whether to Panera for lunch, which he did not like, whether to Comic-Con, I went to my very first San Diego Comic-Con with Stan, and that was an experience. But whenever I went somewhere with him, or if he was doing a live taping of a TV show or something like that, I would see the celebrity kind of switch on. And Stan was always very charming, very funny, but it would switch on in a different way, and we would have to prep him before he went on stage, usually for live TV, because he was older. He had a great memory, but you still have to, if he was speaking about a project, you had to just remind him of what we're talking about. And sometimes he would completely go off script, and we're just like, oh my gosh. But nobody else would notice, because he was such a pro. He would just have people laughing, and nobody would notice. We would be freaking out on the side, but he was just so good. And there was something I admired about him, is he could go up and hold any audience's attention. He could captivate them, and he might not even be ready to do what he's going to do, but he was fantastic in front of a crowd. And I saw speeches of him that he gave in the 1970s, and it was the same thing. So I think it was just a gift that he had. And speaking of the 70s, in 1972, Stan became publisher of Marvel. It was a more business role, which really was not for him. He was more of a creative. So he eventually moved to Hollywood in the early 1980s, and there he made it his mission to develop Marvel properties for film and TV. And this stuff is pretty fun. So there's a lot of treatment from this time. There's Spider-Man, Daredevil, Iron Man, literally any Marvel character you could think of. They were trying to get made into movies and TV in the 80s. And I just wonder what would have happened if these movies had come out in the 80s instead of today. Like how different the Marvel Cinematic Universe would look, especially with the technology that has changed. And one of my favorite things, and I know this is in the exhibit, are handwritten Spider-Man movie ideas from Stan. On the left, they're on these little note cards. There are about 10 envelopes filled with these cards. And they're really cool if I could figure out what they say, because Stan's handwriting was not very good. He was a lefty like me, and I don't know, something about that. But they're really fun to see, and they do have them translated. I say translated, they do have them outside. You can read what they say. It's like from Stanley translated. But they're really fun. And the two things on the right, in the middle, there is I think it's a treatment, and it's Spider-Man movie, written by Stan, for a motion picture by Roger Corman. So if anybody knows who Roger Corman was, he was the producer-director of low-budget genre there. He just passed away. And I cannot imagine what a Spider-Man movie directed by Roger Corman would have looked like. But I'm super intrigued. And on the right, there are Corman's notes. So he was actually involved. And another really cool thing is that James Cameron also wanted to do a Spider-Man movie in the 90s. And that's insane, because can you imagine, instead of Titanic, we got a James Cameron Spider-Man movie in the 90s? Like, that would have been crazy. So just seeing this stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is to think like all the what ifs. And by the 80s and 90s, Stan had really stepped away from the comic book writing. He eventually left Marvel in the late 90s. He became chairman emeritus, which is a title that he kept until he passed away. And he formed his first independent companies after Marvel, one of which was PAL, which I worked for. And Stan may have stepped away from Marvel, but he was not done with comics. He was never done with comics. And at this point, he had really done it all for Marvel, so what else was there to do except conquer the distinguished competition, which is what he called DC. So he was asked to dream up a series at DC Comics in the early 2000s called Just Imagine, and it was basically Stan coming up with alternative origin stories for DC's most famous heroes. On the right is The Flash, a page of comic art from The Flash. He did Superman, he did Batman, he did it all. And in the middle, yeah, there's a Superman, just note, there's a lot of random notes in the papers, which are really fun because there's no other context. And this just says telescopic vision instead of X-ray vision. It's like, go. Figure it out. Yeah. But what's really cool is that there is a 1-hour recorded meeting of Stan with DC in his collection, and I sat in on many meetings with Stan, and I got to hear him throw out his witty one-liners, his incredible ideas. Like, he just had so many ideas in his brain and could fix things really easily, like fix stories and characters. And to me, to see that process captured on tape, because I had seen it, it was really special to me, and I feel like it's a side of him that fans don't normally get to see. You know, Stan at work. So that was really fantastic. And what was really cool about that meeting to me is that the picture on the left is Stan and a life-size Clark Kent doll. I'm not sure exactly what that was, but it was life-size. And they're reading each other's comics. And this was on the wall in the office. So I saw this every day for 8 years. And I never knew where it came from. If you look it up online, there's really not much on it. You don't really find pictures of it. And I was watching this recorded meeting with DC, and there's Stan doing this photo shoot in that meeting. So that was really, really cool for me to see. I was like, now I know where it came from. And there's also footage of him in that meeting doing a photo shoot in a photo booth, like Clark Kent style. Stan is Clark Kent, and I don't know where those photos are. So if anybody's never seen those, let me know, because I really want to see those. But Stan didn't just work for DC at that time. He also went back to Marvel. They did a line of Stan Lee Meets comics, so Stan got to meet all his famous co-creations, like Spider-Man, Silver Surfer. And it's just, again, something else to solidify his icon status by this time, because who else would be beating their own co-creations except Stan? And he did cameos too, as you might know if you've seen any of the recent Marvel movies over the last 15 years. He started making appearances in ads in the 1960s. He did an ad for a local dry cleaner, which is really funny. And then he did, on the left, is a razor commercial he did in the 70s. And he did a lot of TV, Mallrats, Call Sheet, and Mallrats is movies, but he did a lot of TV and movies. There's some Mallrats Call Sheet. There's also a call sheet from Nikita, the TV show. And in the middle is Stan's, invite to the Spider-Man 2 premiere. And behind it is his little parking pass that says reserved Stan Lee. And these things are really cool because you get to go behind the scenes of what comes with being a celebrity as well. All that fun stuff. And there's also a ton of videos and just media in general in the Stan papers. And this is a time lapse of me just going through a bunch of videos. And if I could, I would have loved to just sit down and watch more. There's home movies from the 50s and 80s. There's interviews from different eras, conventions, signings, you name it. TV shows and interview shows that he was on, from the morning news shows to the late night shows. And even those meetings that I mentioned, there's a meeting with Whoopi Goldberg. There's a lunch that he did with Francis Ford Coppola. just super random stuff, but like really, really cool. And again, the breadth of all this just kind of astounded me. Not only did he keep all these things and amass them, but then that he sent them to the archives, so that's pretty amazing. And Stan's legacy, just examples of his legacy abound in his papers. From personal to professional, from heartwarming to intriguing, everything in between. You can really see how his legacy was solidified. Later in his life, there's more and more awards and achievements, and that really reflects the massive reach that he had and the impact that his work had across the world. On the left, there's some postage stamps, marble postage stamps from Guinea and Madagascar. And in the middle is a certificate for Stan Lee Day in Nevada. I think there's at least 5 or 10 Stan Lee Days from Hawaii to New York. And on the right is a poem that Stan wrote to his wife, Joan. And all of those are adorable. They're so sweet. But again, this just shows how far-reaching his fame extended. And for him to keep all of this stuff, it really shows how he wanted to be remembered, even the personal stuff, because it's all part of his legacy. And in closing, there's a story I wanted to share from this year, actually. This is a letter from Burton Morris to Stan from 2005. And Burton Morris is a pop artist. He did the artwork for the Friends TV show, Central Perk. He did a lot of other art, but that's probably what he's best known for. And he knew Stan for a while. They were friends. Stan actually had one of his pieces in his office. And when I was working at Cartoon Studios early this year, we were doing a project with Burton, so he was doing the artwork for one of our projects. And around the same time, I was browsing the Stan Lee papers online, the stuff that's digitized, and I just happened across this letter that Burton wrote Stan. And so, kind of freaked out. I showed my coworkers, and we were filming something with Burton, so they showed it to Burton, surprised him with it, and they were recording, so they surprised him with it and had him read it on video. And he was very, very touched, and he told us all about. In this letter, he was inviting Stan to a party, and he told us about the party, and so it just brought back all these memories for him. And he was so touched that Stan kept this. And for all of us in the room, it was really special too, because it just reminded us how many treasures there are, to be found still. And even though Stan might be gone, his legacy lives on in what he's left behind, whether that's comics on screen or in the Stan Lee papers. So, thank you.
Can we ask you to answer some questions?
Sure.
So can I open the floor to anybody who would like to pose a question? Go ahead.
Could you say something about how it was decided what would be shipped here, the process that you go through all this stuff you collected? What do you know about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm actually not quite sure, because he started donating, Paul might know. Was it the late 70s he started donating, or the early 80s?
I think that he signed the deed of gift to us in '79, something like that. And we had received the first shipment in '82.
Okay.
And then he sent stuff once, twice, 3, 4 times a year. I mean, it really was sort of random. My sense often from talking to people, sometimes it was planned and we'd get a box. At other times, it sounds like there was something in his hand. He handed it to a secretary or somebody and said, send that to Wyoming. They'd stuff it in an envelope and we'd get it.
Yeah, when I started in 2010, I remember seeing him tag some things for the archive, and he would put a little post-it note that said, for the archive, and he would give it to his assistant. And there were many boxes in his assistant's office that were going to the archive. And so I'm not quite sure because not everything came here, but a lot came here, and some of it, I'm like, why did this come here? So I'm not quite sure how he did that. That's a really good question, though. I would like to know, but I think just a lot of stuff he wanted to save and probably didn't have room for it, to be honest. He was like, I want to save it, but I don't have the space, so let's give it to Wyoming. I think that was in his head a lot as well. Yeah, in the back?
Hi, my name is Matthew. Do you know why he chose Wyoming or the American Heritage Center here?
Yeah, that's so you guys in the audience might be able to speak to why Stan chose Wyoming. One of the things that I had heard, and again, it's Stan, he was a fantastic storyteller, so I don't know how true some of the things were. But he used to say that Jack Benny sent his papers here, and he loved Jack Benny, so that's why he sent them here. But there's also, I think somebody reached out to him, right, from Wyoming?
Yes, we had a famous, infamous director in the 70s, 80s, early 90s, the name Gene Gressley. He was originally a mining historian. He was essentially running what we then called the Western History Center. And somebody said to him, you know, this is sort of boring stuff. You really ought to collect popular culture. So we started going out to LA, and I think he persuaded one or two people to give us stuff, and then they would invite him to parties, and then he would hound other people there. When I was beginning to get involved in the American Heritage Center in 2019, I talked to a founding curator of the Autry Museum, the Gene Autry Museum in LA. And that was about the time people in LA started to think, well, maybe it's not just famous people we should be collecting. Maybe we should be, trying to archive the rest of the entertainment industry, the producers and the composers and other people involved. And they kept discovering that they were about 6 months behind Gene Gressley. And they never met Gene, but they knew that if they got interested in it, that he had probably already been there. So for a while, we were ahead of the game for some reason.
That's pretty cool.
I can add something that I think is of interest to that. It's a private club. It was started by CBS. George Storr was very involved with CBS, and so it's on the other side of Snowy Range. And he had connections, of course, with the entertainment industry. And Adolf Deutsch would go to the Ovaldi Club because George Storr had invited he and his secretary to come there. Now, Adolf Deutsch did all the musical scores, or most of them, for Marilyn Monroe's movies. And so those original scores are in here as well. So, and Gressley knew that he was over there and would show up at Ovaldi Club and just mind the people who were yes.
Wow. In the orange?
Yeah, Mr. Lee's instincts for the media are really unparalleled. When we see what social media has become, particularly of recent in what it's projected to be, is there any really key points that we can hold and say, well, if Stan Lee was here with me today, he'd say do this. With regards to media today and how we think it's going to be.
That's a good question, because Stan was alive a little bit when social media was a thing, and he actually used to tweet himself on his Twitter account, and that was really hard to teach him because at the time Twitter had the character limit, and he did not do short. If you go back to those really old tweets, it's like 10 of them in a row, and it goes on, and it's really funny. That's a good question. I'm not sure if I know how to answer it. But Stan definitely was a pioneer in like putting yourself out there, and especially creating a personal brand, which is something that they tell people to do looking for jobs nowadays on social media. He was really a pioneer in that and put himself out there to get the word out, and you see what that did for Marvel. But yeah, talking about the future, I'm not sure. Stan was huge. He loved new technology. He didn't always understand new technology. We would have to teach him things, but he was always really, really interested in like the iPhone and the iPad and learning these things. And you actually see that in his work, because with stuff like Iron Man and characters like that, he was really kind of on the cutting edge of some of these things and incorporating it into his work. So, yeah, that doesn't really answer your question, I'm sorry, but I don't really know what he would say in a way. But I know that he would fit in really well, and he did fit in even though he was using social media kind of in its infancy. But yeah, he loved it. I mean, for him, it was another way to talk directly to the fans. And he did that for years in the comic books. So he loved being able to talk directly to the fans and film little videos and things like that. So, yeah, it's definitely very much in, because he was, again, a pioneer at putting himself out there like people do now. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, knowing that you worked side by side, and knowing that he's a creative, I was just curious if in the day in the life and current events, what kind of personality was he? Was he always focused, or did he have a lot of kind of interesting sidetracks during the day?
It definitely depended what he was doing that day. He was pretty focused. He came in the morning. He would usually leave early afternoon. He would go to lunch in Beverly Hills with Gil, who was the president of the company. They would always go to like 2 or 3 restaurants, and people would be outside asking for his autograph all the time, and then they would sell it. So we told him, we're like, do not sign those, because you're just making money off you. But he was always very happy to sign for real fans who are going to keep it. But no, he pretty much got to work. He did a lot of writing. Still, when I worked for him, he did some new treatments, new stories, and then he would sometimes be busy filming something in his office. People were coming into the office all the time to film, and he would be in meetings. So he was definitely focused, but he was just naturally charming and funny. He was so funny, and he would just crack jokes a lot, and you would not expect it. And sometimes even when the camera was off, because when the camera was on, again, he was an actor. He wanted to be an actor when he was young. He lived for the camera, but even when the camera was off, he would just be joking around and having a good time. So yeah, it was a little bit of everything with him. He was on when he had to be on and working, but there was always something happening, and it was really fun because we had TV crews. Al Roker was in the office. So many celebrities came to the office just to meet Stan. Sometimes they would talk about a project. But Leonardo DiCaprio came in. Charlie Sheen came in. That was kind of a weird one. The singer Pharrell came in. So stuff was always happening in the office, and yeah, it was a little bit of everything. And for me, it was really nice sometimes when they would be setting up in his office. There would be a bunch of people in there, and he would come over just to rest, or not be in the middle of people setting up around him. And he would come over, and that's when I sometimes got to talk to him about old movies, and that was fun. And just talking, like he's sitting next to you, and I'm just chatting with the guy who co-created Spider-Man, just having a nice talk here. So to me, again, it was just normal until I thought about it sometimes, and I was like, oh my goodness. And all my friends, kind of freaked out. they would always be the first to tell people that I worked, because I did not normally tell people I worked for Stan, but they would be the first to volunteer that information for me. So. Yeah, but it was a lot of fun.
So Stan began as a writer. He wasn't really an artist. He wrote the text, the stories that other people wrote. And then he ultimately, like you would expect to happen, he became an administrator, decided he didn't like being an administrator, he went back to being creative, and then he went to LA. And that's where that story keeps ending. And I have trouble imagining him as a creator in LA, because what I imagine him doing is that he's trying to cut deals with people about taking his character, his existing stories, and making them into cartoons, TV, movies, etc. Is he ever creating? I mean, he's not going back to comics out in LA. Does he have a creative side? Is he writing scripts? I mean, you showed us a couple of scripts that other people, that he had licensed to. But is he working with them, even though they have the license?
Oh yes, yeah, especially in the 80s, and I think 90s too. So in the 90s, I know there were some of the TV shows that came out, like the X-Men. I think that just came back, actually, like on Netflix. I forget the full title. But no, in the 80s, so the stuff there, and again, with the Spider-Man movie ideas, he was writing all of that stuff. So sometimes he didn't really write scripts. He was not great at writing scripts. He did try a few times. And they're like 270 pages, which is not, scripts are way less than 200 pages, so, but he did collaborate with some famous directors and write scripts. Unfortunately, they're not very good, but he did a lot of writing, trying to get those movies made and TV shows, and the TV shows were a little bit more successful, but he definitely tried to get the Spider-Man movie made, and so all that stuff he was writing still. He was writing the treatments that would hopefully sell, and then somebody else would write the script. But they did not. I don't exactly know why they didn't sell in the 80s. I think, that it wasn't proven yet until the early 2000s. Yeah.
Was it, this is a follow-up, was it that the technology wasn't quite there yet? And the technology had to be there to make the movies interesting?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it, because they did live action. I think in the 70s there was something Spider-Man, and there was the TV movie, The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, I think it was called, in the late 80s. And yeah, some of that stuff, I mean, without modern day CGI, it doesn't look as great, and it's a little funny sometimes, and people laugh in the wrong places. Yeah, I think definitely part of it was the technology wasn't there. And again, it hadn't been proven, and so once you get to the early 2000s, and they start making superhero movies, and they see the success, everybody wanted to jump on the bandwagon at that point. But yes, Dan was definitely still writing in the 80s and 90s. He did a little bit. I think his last co-created character was in the 80s or 90s, but he definitely did not do as much comic stuff at that time, but he was still definitely writing.
Yep. In your personal conversations with him, did he have a favorite genre of classic film?
Yes, he loved adventure. He loved action adventure, so one of his favorite movies, again, was Adventures of Robin Hood. He was really influenced by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, to create the Hulk, because the Hulk is kind of a marriage of some of the things in those. But he also, I didn't know this, but his assistant told me one of his favorite movies was My Fair Lady as well. And I think he really liked The Quiet Man. So he was kind of all over the map there. But he talked a lot about loving action adventure. He was a huge Errol Flynn fan. He talked about Errol Flynn a lot. And so as a kid, that was his hero. And so he always kind of wanted to be the hero in the action movie. So that was, I think, one of his favorites.
More of a comment, but I was wondering if your first slide had the two magazines from the 1920s. I'm wondering if he used those when he was writing the romance comics in the 40s or 50s, because I think both of them have couples on.
Yeah, I didn't notice that. They both have couples on the covers, so that could be. I have no idea. I want to try to look back. Yeah. I'm still perplexed at that. So.
Maybe this is My Fair Lady.
Yeah. Maybe it could be.
Did you ever get a sense of what he was watching out of the contemporary films? I mean, he was in Hollywood.
I know. I don't think he watched it. He's kind of like me and didn't watch anything new. He would go to the premieres of the Marvel movies, so I think he watched the Marvel stuff. But I didn't really get a sense. I feel like he didn't watch a lot of stuff. I feel like he would go home to his wife. I don't know what they did, have dinner and like go to sleep early. I'm not quite sure. He didn't go to random movies in Los Angeles, though, especially at that age. Yeah, that's a good question, though. I was kind of curious.
So where do all the cameos come from? I mean, is it just that he wants to act, or?
Yeah, I think, gosh, that's another, I don't have answers to a lot of these questions, but that's a good question as well. I know one of the first ones he did was X-Men, the X-Men movie, I think, in 2000. And I think that they reached out to him for that. And then it just became a thing. First of all, he loved it. He loved being on set. He loved acting. And so I think it just kind of became a thing when he enjoyed it. People enjoyed it. He would always say, this is just his humor, he would always say that the success of the Marvel movies is because of his cameos. Because they were so short, and people could blink, and they would miss him, and then they would have to get another ticket. That's his cameo again. And I'm like, yes, that's the reason. But no, he loved them. So I think, again, once people, like the fans, started to expect them, so once they did, it was like, you can't not do it. There were a few that he missed out on. There was some that shot in Australia, I think, really far away. But he would go to Atlanta to shoot. He usually didn't shoot them in LA, actually. I think the Avengers, because we have footage of him on the Avengers set, and I think he did 2 cameos in that, and one was cut, I believe. So we have footage of him filming the one that was cut, or not. I think Powell had that footage, and so yeah, but he would travel pretty far. But I think Australia was a little too far for him to travel for those. But yeah, so there were a few that he didn't do. A lot.
It was also a bit of an Alfred Hitchcock cameo. For creators and
yes, yeah.
His or her film.
And he knew that. He knew that too. And again, I think he admired Hitchcock, so that was something that he really liked that he was able to do. I think he said that he did more cameos than Hitchcock, which for him, another like I beat you moment. But yeah, I don't know the exact cameo count, but between the movies and then he did the TV shows, Marvel TV shows, he even did some DC stuff because again, he did not discriminate if it meant that he could be on camera. He did a little bit of everything. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question. Anybody has one?
Is there any material from when he was in the service? Was he writing letters or anything? Because you were curious about his role, and I know during World War I they had Liberty theaters where they put on productions at different training grounds, and I just didn't know if somehow he might have been involved with something like that.
Yeah, I haven't really seen much from World War II, which is really sad because I would love to see some of the training manuals that he did. I think people have looked for them, historians and authors, and I don't think they've found them. So they might be in an archive, some of that stuff, like some kind of World War II or National Archive, maybe if they exist. But he also wasn't famous at that point, so it wasn't something that you know, because some of Frank Capra's stuff that he did during the war survives, but he was pretty well known. So, yeah, I haven't seen a lot from the war period. And I was actually pointing out in the exhibit and in my presentation, there's a picture of him from the war. And there's at the top, it's cut off, and you can see it over here. It says, there's a little bit of a poster, it says "Not Me" at the bottom. And what that was a poster for venereal disease that Stan worked on. And at the top of it, it said "Me," and there was like a little guy, and he's like, "Not me." And that was something that Stan worked on, and people have tried finding that, and they can't find it. So the only way it still exists is half of it is in that image. But that was something Stan also talked about. So it'd be really awesome to find, because he did obviously a lot of very interesting things during the war, and yeah, I wish we could find that. I hope it survives.
Okay, well, thank you very much.